Thanks, Clark, and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Education Committee. Agenda item 1 is apologies. Are members aware of any apologies?
I've had one from Diane and one from Justin, Chair.
Thank you. Any other apologies?
No, sorry, I've just received a delegated vote as well in writing before the meeting began.
That's
Will
great.
Harry delegates to Robin.
Okay, that's great. Agenda item 2 then is Chairperson's business. Can I refer members to a record of an informal meeting with Baker Tilly Mooney Moore about the strategic review of the Education Authority at page 3 of tabled papers, and seek members' agreement to email all MLAs to make them aware of the strategic review if they should wish to engage with it. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, thanks. That's obviously the first comprehensive strategic review of the Education Authority. Its governance, control, operation, effectiveness, efficiency since its establishment, which I think the witness said is 7 years ago now. So an extremely important review. The committee has obviously fed into that informally, and members may wish to do so on a one-to-one basis. Agenda item 3 then is draft minutes. Can I refer members to draft minutes of the committee meetings on the 1st of February, 2nd of February and 9th of February at pages 6 to 17 of your meeting packs, and seek your agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 is matters arising. There are no matters arising. Agenda item 5 is correspondence. Can I refer members to page 23, where we have 27 items of correspondence and a summary note included at page 24. Clark, do you wish to speak to the correspondence?
Certainly, Chair. Members, item 5.2 on page 28 is a response from the department regarding its policy on school trips during COVID-19 and also about clinically extremely vulnerable school staff. The department states that educational visits, be they day or residential visits, are only required to adhere to relevant travel requirements and any requirements put in place by authorities in the destination country. So not, specific to DE regulations. And it also indicates that advice for clinically extremely vulnerable people has not been amended since initial guidance from the Chief Medical Officer in April 2021. Members, are you content to forward this response to the correspondent who raised the issue with the committee?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, item 5.3 on page 35 is correspondence from the Department of Education regarding its business plan mid-year report. Members, are you content to try to schedule budget and business plan briefing from DE officials? We are short for time on additional briefings at this stage, but there's some space in March, if you wish.
I think that sounds important, Evening. So members content to agree that?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Item 5.5 on page 48 is correspondence from the Committee of the Executive Office regarding the launch of the formal public consultation period on the Executive's draft investment strategy from Northern Ireland. I've been liaising with research already about the budget and the investment strategy, and if members are content, we'll hope to have a report from them which will bring members up to date on all of the recent budgetary events and the investment strategy in the next couple of weeks. And also that will help us, I suppose, set out some issues for the legacy report for the next incoming committee in respect of expenditure in education. Is that all right?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 5.6 on page 49 is correspondence from the Public Accounts Committee regarding its report on closing the gap, social deprivation and links to educational attainment. Now again, we are short of time. The this report came out at this, I think it was the 10th of February. So the memorandum of reply from the department won't be until the end of March. But do members want to explore options for a briefing from the audit office on the report, or do you think that's for the next committee to look at?
I'd be interested to hearing that if there's time, if members are agreed.
Yeah, I mean, it's that same territory as Fair Start. It is very, very interesting material. I'll see what can be arranged, Chair. Okay. Item 5.7 on page 74 is correspondence from SIA about the launch of its new student guide to assessment arrangements, optional omissions and contingencies for summer 2022. SIA, we were hoping to schedule on the 23rd of February, but that will now be as soon as possible afterwards. So are members content to discuss this item with SIA when it comes to brief the committee?
Yes. Do we have a date for SIA's briefing of the committee, Clerk?
Yes, it's possible that the 9th or the 2nd of March is possible, although they would prefer the 9th. So
Okay.
yeah,
As soon
they're
as
coming
possible.
quite
Okay.
soon. So you would like them as soon as possible. That's grand. I'll confirm
Okay.
in a second. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, where's my correspondence gone? So item 5.8 on page 88 is correspondence from an individual about a product to improve air quality in classrooms. Are members content to note that and refer it to the Education Authority for information?
Yeah, Clark, could we send that to the Education Authority and the Education Minister? I don't know about other members, but I have received some inquiries from individuals and organisations with regards to their capacity to provide air filtration and ventilation devices, and it would be useful to know from the department and or the Education Authority who they are best placed to contact to in relation to that. Members be content with that? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I have a name from the Education Authority for the procurement in relation to that. So thank you. Okay, members, item 5.9 to 5.43 on pages 91 to 116 of the meeting papers, and also pages 7 to 23 of table papers, are correspondence regarding concerns about the Integrated Education Bill. The committee stage of the bill finished on the 2nd,
24th.
24th of November, sorry. And the bill is waiting to have its further consideration stage scheduled at the moment. So the correspondence I probably would have liked to contribute to the committee stage, but weren't aware of it at the time. Are members content that we write to those correspondents providing this information and referring them to the committee report on the Integrated Education Bill?
Yep. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you,
Clark.
Chair. Okay, so there are items in table papers. The bill items for the General Teaching Council Directions Bill and accompanying explanatory and financial memorandum. And I understand that accelerated passage and second stage of the bill are scheduled for plenary next week, but I haven't got the timings for that just yet. So, I'll keep members posted. Then also item 5.46 is correspondence from the Causeway, Coast and Glens Borough Council, providing its views on the period products free provision bill. Again, the committee has completed its report on that bill. This is a supplementary reply. So the council already did give us some information from its perspective, and this is additional. But perhaps members, we can provide this to the bill sponsor in case it's useful to him.
Agreed?
Thank you, members. Okay, item 5.47 on page 43 is correspondence regarding delays to the rollout of the department's Happy Healthy Minds pilot. So we last had a written update on this in November. Are members content to relay these queries to the department and ask for an update on the pilot scheme?
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
Thank you. That's it. That's me, Chair.
Thanks, Clark. Are there any main reasons set out for the delay of the scheme?
The letter is from a person who would be providing some of the therapies under the health.
Right. Okay.
And it's about kind of the logistical, the confirmation when you get planning it and when you get paid, and so it's on that level.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll get some clarity on that.
That's great. Okay. Thank you, Clark. Okay, members, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per summary note at page 24 with the previous exceptions? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, members, agenda item 6 is our forward work programme. Can I refer you to a draft forward work programme on page 118 of the meeting papers, and advise that the Business Committee agreed at its meeting yesterday to schedule additional plenary sittings on Wednesday next week and the week after. I'm not sure if they consulted any of us, but can I seek members' view on the impact of this on committee meetings, and suggest that we proactively liaise with the Business Committee, if they have not already done so with us, to try and find a way to avoid undue clashes. Clark, perhaps you could guide us, but I had been trying to establish the indicative timings for the additional plenary settings on Wednesday next week and the week after, and there was some suggestion that they might start at 12 noon, which
Sure, if you like me, I have
yeah.
If you want me to give you the times?
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Robbie.
Okay, okay, so Wednesday the 23rd, 10:30. There is an Assembly Commission budget briefing. Motion, followed by the further consideration stage of the Integrated Education Bill at 11:30.
Okay, thanks for that.
And there's another, the Wednesday after, the scheduled business for that as well. In a memento, it's obviously in draft at the moment, okay? 10:30, which is, so there's further consideration of business not concluded on Tuesday, and then consideration stage of the defamation bill from 10:30. So they're both sitting at 10:30 each Wednesday.
Okay. The obviously there's a just from a practical point of view, folks, you can advise me accordingly, but I'm working on a presumption that Education Committee members will be engaged by an Integrated Education Bill, which is scheduled for 11:30 next week. Therefore, it would seem extremely challenging, if not possible, for us to conduct business during that time. Seeking some advice from you in that regard, Clark, but that suggests that we may need to, if possible, meet at 9 a.m. and conclude business at approximately 11 a.m. As I said, I hadn't heard from the Business Committee prior to today in that regard. It seems like that might be necessary next Wednesday. Clark, do you want to speak, and then I'll bring in any members that want to come in as well?
Okay, well, we can try to just have one, to schedule one briefing then next Wednesday, members, to allow that, and there's no point in going up against plenary business. The SIA have confirmed for the 2nd of March, so again, you might be wanting to start that relatively early then. Did you say the defamation bill? No, that was the 2nd, Robbie?
Yeah, that was the week after next, Robbie, wasn't it?
Week after is defamation bill, and I think the plenary Monday and Tuesday is considerable, so it's very likely that the business won't conclude on the Tuesday. So, the Defamation Bill is supposed to be starting at 10:30, but could be pushed on. But plenary will start at 10:30 on that Wednesday, guys.
Okay. I don't think we've any choice other than to meet at 9 a.m. And as you say, Clark, take one substantive briefing on both of those dates. Do any members want to say otherwise? Or does that seem like a necessary approach?
Yeah, I mean, the alternatives, I suppose we've already explored, early meetings on a Tuesday, some members available on a Thursday morning. With the live stream, we do have a bit more flexibility in, meeting at different times. But it may be simplest just to arrange one briefing for each of those Wednesdays and start early.
What's scheduled for next week, Clark?
So next week we've been trying to get through to the Fiscal Council to ask them to brief the committee, because there's such a lot of budget work going on at the moment that perspective would be interesting, I think, for everyone.
Agreed.
And then on the second, CCEA have agreed to attend. I mean, members kind of gave me a steer last week about what to prioritise. So we're hoping to prioritise EA leadership team coming, the NITC updating the committee, the Substitute Teachers Manifesto group, a DE report on children and young people strategy, and then we had in mind to go to the planetarium on the 2nd actually, but it's not available that day. It's available on the 16th.
Okay.
And really, I suppose we have to just, get a holding pattern on some of this, because plenary is going to keep knocking things, unfortunately,
I think I'll steer us towards a proposal, unless members feel otherwise. But I think if we meet at 9 a.m. next week and schedule the Fiscal Council, if at all possible, with regards budget, and SEA the following Wednesday at 9 a.m. regards examinations, and that's your steer for the next fortnight, Clark. And then if members review the other priorities that we have, and with a view to programming them into the last 3 Wednesdays of the mandate, or additional sessions on either a Tuesday morning or a Thursday morning if necessary. Is that fair enough for now, Clark?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank
Members
you.
content to agree that? Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
the other thing I would just flag to you again in the forward work programme is that on the 24th, which is a Thursday, we were hoping to do a youth engagement on Zoom with young people, and that would be an update one, I suppose, about emotional and mental health now that they're back in school. They've been subject to restrictions, and now those restrictions are beginning to lift. So I've only had a couple of replies from members about availability for that. So do come back to me and let me know. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Clark. Okay, members, that's our forward work programme. Members content to endorse the forward work programme as amended. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, then, agenda item 7 is the Future Schools Project oral briefing on the work of the Future Schools Project. Can I ask broadcasting to remove members from the spotlight and to add our witnesses, and refer members to a briefing paper from the Future Schools Project at page 123 and Ulster University Community Conversation Toolkit at page 128. Can I welcome Dr. Una O'Connor-Bones, Senior Lecturer at Ulster University, Dr. Jessica Bates, Senior Lecturer at Ulster University, Mr. Stephen Knowlston, Course Director, Ulster University, and Mr. Andrew Norrie, Parental Engagement Campaign Manager at the Integrated Education Fund. You're all very welcome, folks. Can I advise you that you will have up to 10 minutes to make an opening statement, followed by questions from members, which can be answered across the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introductions there. I'd like to make a start then by telling everybody here about the project. The Future Schools project is being undertaken in partnership between researchers from the UNESCO Centre, School of Education at Ulster University and the Integrated Education Fund. It's funded by the Community Foundation for Northern Ireland through their Civic Innovation Programme. And the core aim of the programme is to support initiatives that put people at the centre of decision making in Northern Ireland. We were awarded just under 70,000 by CFNI. It's a one-year project from the 1st of April 2021 and will finish in May. And prior to this, we also had a small bit of funding for a pilot project. So the project Future Schools came about through two previous projects that the Ulster research team had undertaken with funding from the IEF. The first, Isolated Together, Rural Pairs of Schools by Dr. Stephen Rolston and Dr. Sally Cook, explored the prevalence of pairs of rural primary schools, typically one controlled and one maintained, located in close proximity to each other, but relatively isolated from other primary schools, and where there are issues relating to sustainability for both schools. And there's a briefing paper on the isolated schools research available on the Transforming Education series of papers available on the UU website and the IEF website. And the second body of work, which is part of the backdrop to the Future Schools initiative, is the community conversation work undertaken primarily by myself and Dr. Una O'Connor-Bones. And that work has centred around an innovative methodology enabling parent and community voices to be heard in relation to school provision prior to any formal consultation process that might be undertaken by area planning teams in the EA and CCMS to establish what form of school provision would be supported in the wider community. And we've carried out a number of community conversations across rural and urban settings in Northern Ireland and developed a community conversation toolkit to guide and support that work. So building on these previous pieces of research, the Future Schools project has three aims, and that's to support school communities that would like to explore how sustainable primary school provision might evolve for their geographic area, to provide guidance on how they could move forward with that in practical terms, and to develop a toolkit resource that can be used by communities and stakeholders to support them going forward. So the toolkit will provide support and guidance that will enable schools to undertake self-evaluation in relation to school sustainability, provide guidance in using the community conversation methodology to engage communities in shared exploration about the way forward, and also to set out the pathways that will support communities to work alongside the managing authorities towards a realistic, sustainable solution to ensure ongoing school provision in their area. So it aligns very much with the New Decade New Approach Agreement, which states the education system has a diversity of school types, each with its own distinctive ethos and values. However, it is not sustainable. The parties acknowledge the progress made in developing new models of sharing, cooperation and integration. There is a desire to build on this as a basis for delivering long-term improvements in the quality, equity and sustainability of the system. And also with the Education Minister's statement from August in relation to setting the priorities for the next regional area plan, which recognised that solutions coming forward which maintain education provision in communities where unsustainable schools exist. And this focus should be on creating a vibrant, sustainable primary school where each pupil is in a class with a single year group. And she stated that it is incumbent upon all area planning stakeholders and schools to engage positively with the Education Authority and other sectors and collaborate and partner in the co-design of development proposals to bring forward innovative, creative and shared solutions for sustainable provision and to continue to encourage and facilitate integrated and Irish medium education. So how do we get to that position and move forward? So our previous research and these stated policy positions emphasise the need for innovative area-based solutions for primary provision, particularly where current arrangements do not meet the threshold for school sustainability. The community conversation work in particular also highlighted two key considerations. Firstly, the need to engage with school communities in advance of them reaching the point of finding themselves on an annual action plan for area planning. And secondly, the need for further guidance and support for schools once a community conversation has been completed in terms of how to move forward. And that's where the Future Schools project comes in. So we've been gathering evidence from parents and school communities about their needs and preferences regarding school provision. And from this, we've been developing and testing a toolkit resource to support school communities in moving forward towards an agreed provision for their area, which will be sustainable over the longer term. The draft Strategic Area Plan 2, which has just been published by the Education Authority, that indicates that 44% of rural primary schools are below the minimum enrolment threshold of 105 pupils. It also emphasises that early identification of challenges and opportunities is the key to enabling sustainable education provision within an area. So self-evaluation is an essential element in ensuring this, as is that early engagement with the local community. The research work is undertaken by the team from Ulster University to ensure its independence and rigour. So the outcomes of the project are not to predetermine pathways for specific schools or communities, but to empower them and support them in determining what will lead to sustainable future provision in conjunction with the EA, CCMS and the department and other key stakeholders. So in spite of the COVID restrictions, there's been really strong community buy-in in terms of participation in this project. And we've undertaken a range of activities since the project started last April. Throughout the project, we've engaged in ongoing meetings with relevant education stakeholders, not just in the department, the EA and CCMS, but also other bodies such as the Catholic Schools Trustee Service, the Transferors Representative Council, NICE, and other bodies through the Area Planning Working Group. We've engaged with parents through three different strands. Firstly, we carried out a number of community conversations with parents in three different rural areas back in June, and that gave us an opportunity for qualitative discussion with parents. We also carried out a large-scale Northern Ireland-wide parental survey, specifically about parents' perceptions of school provision and their preferences for school provision and sustainable schools. So that was designed by the research team, but it was implemented by Lucid Talk on behalf of the project. And that ran at the end of June last year and received over 1,000 responses from all across Northern Ireland. We then had a third parent engagement event in September, again online because of COVID through Zoom. And that enabled us to invite parents from across Northern Ireland to meet with us. We could report back on the project so far, the findings from the survey and the previous conversations with parents. But it also allowed parents to again give us more of their views regarding education. The second strand in terms of collecting data has been with school governors. Now, school governors in Northern Ireland are actually a really hard to reach group, given that there's no set list enabling you to contact school governors directly. So we designed an online survey for primary school governors that ran from September into October last year, and that generated over 600 responses from all across Northern Ireland and from all primary school sectors. And, given that school governors are a hard to reach group and that there's no mechanism for reaching out to them individually, that's a really strong response rate from a group of key educational stakeholders in Northern Ireland that are very much under research. So we're asking them about their views on their understanding of sustainability criteria for schools, their confidence in evidencing those criteria, and what they would like to see going forward in terms of more guidance and support for school governors. And then the final thing that we're doing at the moment then is continuing the work on building the toolkit, but we're also testing it across a couple of different areas. So we're testing the self-evaluation component with principals and governors, and also then going back to talking more to parents to review and reflect on what advice we're going to give around community conversations in the toolkit resource. So the final toolkit resource will have those three elements: self-evaluation for schools to look at where they currently are, to benchmark themselves and collect and use evidence to look at where they are in terms of school sustainability. Then community conversations with the wider local community to begin to see what are the realistic options for a sustainable way forward. What would there be community support for? And then the final third part of the toolkit is setting up those pathways, the different options and processes and implications that would need to be followed going forward. So now, I wasn't sure today whether we'd have a chance to show some slides or not, but if I could just include a couple of direct quotations from participants, I'll do that, and then we'll just finish off this initial part of the briefing, and we'll be happy to take questions. But from our conversations with parents in June, one of the participants said, if at some stage there are pressures on keeping both schools sustainable, we need to work together to keep the best of what we've got. We need to make decisions about what we want before we are told what is going to be happening. And that's really critical, that the idea of engaging with school communities before they reach that point of being on an action plan. In terms of the school governor survey, some of the feedback from school governors about what they would like to see included ongoing open conversations between all relevant stakeholders to consider alternatives for change which are proactive as opposed to reactive, and engagement with schools to help them look objectively at sustainability and give guidance and support at the earliest opportunity to help them become more sustainable. And then just in terms of our current engagement work, in terms of trialling out the toolkit with governors and principals, one of them came back with this feedback. I believe the toolkit could be very effective as a focal point when engaging governors on discussions about school sustainability. Some of the indicators are extremely effective in that they can provide quantitative responses that can focus minds on sustainability. The toolkit can encourage communities to be proactive in determining their own future. It also provides opportunities for cross-sectoral discussions on school provision in particular areas. So throughout the work, just to finish then, we've been meeting regularly with the area planning teams from the Education Authority, CCMS and the department, so that the project work, while being about engagement with communities, also then aligns with the needs and processes of those responsible for area planning in schools. And we're obviously very mindful, of course, of the new strategic area plan, which will come in September for 5 years. And that within that, consideration will be given to an exploratory plan or phase. That's the work that needs to be done with school communities before they're on an action plan or facing closure. So we see this work, the Future Schools work, as providing a template or approach for that. So we also obviously hope that there'll be interest and support from the project more widely from political parties and public representatives in order to embed the project outcomes in education, strategy and structures. So I think that's probably my 10 minutes up.
Thanks very much indeed, Dr. Bates. A lot of really helpful briefing there to guide our questions. The aim of the Education Authority strategic area plan is stated as a network of viable and sustainable schools that are of the right type, the right size, located in the right place, at the right time, with a focus on raising standards. Do you think we currently have, or to what extent do you think we currently have that network in place?
I'm not sure, colleagues, if anybody wants to take this question, or if I'll take this first question. Well, I mean, I think we we quite obviously have a network of schools in place, but it's on record, quite widely from a range of different perspectives and people as being not currently sustainable, that there is duplication there within the system. Particularly in relation to very small schools. Nobody is critical of small schools. Small schools can have their place in society. The issue is those much smaller schools where there is duplication, where you have schools sitting side by side. So there's strengths in the network, but obviously we know the evidence is there that there's a number of schools either with insufficient school places, and we see that particularly at this time of year, when parents are filling in their forms for progression to post-primary, but also then that the schools that have the surplus of school places. So clearly the system isn't aligned to the needs of parents at the moment. And this work that we're doing is very much about engaging with parents and giving them a much stronger input and voice into decision-making around school provision.
Okay. And I'm familiar with the work around the pairs of small schools as well. Would any of our witnesses like to give us an idea of the extent of pairs of schools across Northern Ireland?
That's probably one for me, Chris.
Thanks.
The work that myself and Sally Cook did from Ulster University, we did a bit of GIS analysis to find out where these pairs were, because we were aware of them. You drive around Northern Ireland, you drive through a village, and there are two schools next to each other serving two different communities, and you think, how on earth could this small village sustain two schools? So we thought we'd do a proper analysis of it, and we found 32 pairs of them. Those are schools that were very close together, an average of about 600 or 700 yards apart from each other, and yet quite a distance away from other schools. And many of those schools, in most cases actually, either one or both were unsustainable. 26 out of the 32 pairs actually had either one school unsustainable or both schools unsustainable in terms of enrolment. I know there were many other components to unsustainability rather than just enrolment numbers. But these are schools very often that are shaky in terms of their long-term sustainability, and yet there they are striving away to provide an education to a particular community. And our finding, I suppose, was and again, it's a bit like Jessica was saying, this work as well was not trying to come up with definitive solutions. It's for the communities and for the area planning authorities to come up with a solution. But we certainly hope that it pointed at the fact that the present arrangement of having pairs of schools in rural areas, because these were all in rural areas, is not sustainable, and that communities and area planning authorities should be finding ways in which you can maintain primary school provision in that area, and strong primary school and sustainable primary school provision in that area, but not with the duplication that Jessica referred to as well.
I asked the Education Authority how they identify what the right type, right size, located in the right place at the right time school is, and I'm not sure I got a definitive answer. Do you know how that is done, and could you speak to the way in which the community conversation toolkit, for example, might have a contribution to make in that task?
Well, it's an historical position that we're in. We're in the system we're in because of the historical development of the school system. And that's now under review, because clearly there isn't the right dispersal of schools in the right places for the current population and demographics, which are changing in Northern Ireland as well. So the community conversation, we've done those in areas where there have been insufficient school places, where there have been some very small schools, but then a range of primary schools in the South Belfast area, for example, where there have not been enough places across the sector and across different sectors, as well then as rural areas where you have 2, 3, 4 small schools, where 2 or 3 of those may not be sustainable on their own. In terms of current sustainable schools policy criteria, we should say that's the benchmark that's currently being used when schools are being evaluated. So the community conversation then enables a a mechanism or approach for finding out what communities on the ground would actually support. And there's no point other people coming up with a solution unless there's going to be support for that on the ground. And that's the value of the community conversation mechanism. Before getting to the point where somebody in a policy situation or in a department or in a managing authority has made a decision, there's an opportunity to actually engage on the ground with communities in a way that is neutral and brings people together in a facilitated, rigorous way to enable those conversations. And it's through those, and the obvious example was the situation in Carnlough Glenarm, where a community conversation foregrounded then the change in education provision in that area. And that has helped create more sustainable provision for Seaview integrated in the Glenarm area. So a community conversation allows parents and the wider community to show what they've got support for. And that then helps the process of area planning because it supports those decision makers in seeing what is more realistic for that particular area.
Sounds like a constructive approach. My engagement with the EA suggests that at times the EA area planning process assessment of what community support and what parental and pupil preference is based on current attendance trends at already existing schools. So is that your experience as well? And are the EA in any way trying to widen that approach to a more community conversation-esque basis?
I mean, certainly the rationale for all of this work has been the absence of this kind of engagement. And that's why the project exists in the first place and why the community conversation work, was funded and happened. But I have to say from the outset, the community conversation work and the Future Schools work, look, we sit down regularly with the EA, CCMS and the department, and they're all very happy to see how, well, it's not for me to say how happy they are, but they want to see how this mechanism can support area planning and give a stronger voice to communities, because that's what's been missing up to this point. People making decisions that clearly aren't working for local areas where you either have not enough school places or too many school places in individual schools. And the way around that is to find, well, what do parents actually need and what would they work? Because many parents are not sending their child to the school that's their first preference. That we know that from across Northern Ireland. They're sending their child to a school that they can actually just get a place in. So we need to, look and find out what there is support for. And it is important, I think, to bear in mind with this process, it's not about us determining an outcome for any particular area. That's really important. It's about the process and the mechanism. But for this sort of work to be scaled up and to be, achievable and realistic and to work in the longer term, it needs that kind of buy-in from across the board, because we've done a wide range, a range of individual community conversations for particular areas. They've been funded primarily through the IEF, but Andrew can talk more to that. The IEF has secured that money through National Lottery funding, through Community Foundation for Northern Ireland funding, where there's been a real desire to give that stronger voice to parents. That's not, that can't be rolled out across Northern Ireland without this buy-in and support. But, we're very encouraged about the feedback we're getting on the work that we're doing. We will be part of that strategic lab in the Department of Education in March that will look at the new exploratory phase in this second strategic area plan. So we're very heartened by the fact that those people working on the second strategic area plan recognise the need for exploratory work that comes in before a school moves to an action plan. And we would hope that the work we've been doing has informed that thinking.
Okay, two very quick final question then. Have you had any indication that the community conversation approach will be mainstreamed into the area planning process? And were there any key findings in the Northern Ireland-wide parental survey? And then I'll bring in other members. Thanks.
So with regard to the embedding of the community conversation methodology, I think it's moved beyond that. It's more about the embedding of the Future Skills Toolkit. Because when we carried out community conversations, while we found them a really good mechanism for finding out what communities might support within a particular area, we did, as I said in the briefing, find out that there was two things missing. There was a bit of work that needed to become before a community conversation and a bit of work that needed to come after. And that's really what we're doing with the Future Skills Toolkit. So the very fact that, that we're having regular meetings with the department and EA and CCMS about the toolkit, briefing them on it, that we're going to be part of the conversations around this new exploratory phase, I think would point to the fact that this is a methodology, is certainly one that's on the table for going forward. In terms of the parent engagement survey, we were very encouraged at the number of responses for that. So parents were asked about whether they were concerned about the future sustainability of their primary school, and 43% indicated some level of concern. They also stated within that survey, almost 3/4 of respondents indicated that there should be a merging of small, undersubscribed rural primary schools. There was also an open-ended question about what should be done to ease pressure of primary school budgets, and a range of responses came in there, but the themes that repeatedly came across in that question were merging the management authorities so that there's one central education body, integration of schools, closing of unsustainable schools, merging under-subscribed schools, increasing taxes to fund schools, reducing the religious duplication of school provision, increased sharing of specialist facilities between schools, whether that's science labs or sports facilities, and creating one education system for all.
Thanks for that, Jessica. Can I bring in other members at this point then and move to Pat Sheehan, MLA?
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks to all our guests this morning. And I just want to return briefly to the Community Conversation Toolkit. And during the course of our scrutiny of the Integrated Education Bill, we looked at what community engagement should look like in terms of development proposals and area planning. And of course, the Community Conversation Toolkit came to the fore in that conversation. I'm just wondering, how effective would a process like that be? And can you explain what that might look like in legislation and as part of a statutory process? And I know, Jessica, you've already mentioned the Future Schools Toolkit. So could you give us your view on that? Thanks.
Thank you. So the Community Conversation Toolkit is designed to enable others to carry it out and adapt it for different situations and needs. Obviously, we've carried them out primarily ourselves, the team at Ulster, but there needs to be a mechanism for rolling that out on a wider basis. And when we complete the Future Schools work, that's what we're looking at in particular. How can that be scaled up? So that would include not just providing the toolkit, but providing resource and guidance on how to use the toolkit so that it can be rolled out more widely. So to design and set out what the training and support might be, what school communities might need in relation to that. Because it does need to be scaled out. And, obviously if it's brought into the legislation around the exploratory phase of the strategic planning, that could be the process then by which schools demonstrate that they're being proactive, because this is what we keep hearing when we talk to parents, to interested parents, to those working in community development and to principals and governors, is that they want to be more proactive about the future provision in their area. And that's really where the Future Schools Toolkit comes in. So it allows schools to benchmark themselves in terms of sustainability, then carry out a community conversation, and then look and see what are the different pathways, the innovative pathways for school provision in that area. And already we see in the draft Strategic Action Plan 2, again, a setting out of what those different options might be in terms of mergers or shared campuses or integrated provision or joint faith schools. And it's just looking and setting out then what the implications of each of those might be for that particular community. Because we found when we did carry out community conversations in the past, at the end of a community conversation, there was a sense of having contributed and really engaged and provided their views. The community felt that sense of empowerment, but that dissipated very quickly when there wasn't action. So, for communities to engage in setting out what they would like to see, there needs to be an opportunity then for follow through. And of course, the challenge up to this point has been that development proposals are written on a sectoral basis. And what happens then when the solution for an area is cross-sectoral or integrated? It's much more difficult then in terms of moving forward. And we're trying to establish a mechanism that will make that much easier for communities.
Okay, thanks for that. And just moving on to the issue of schools wanting to transform their status, and that could be for numerous reasons, falling enrolment numbers in particular, but it could also be the result of poor leadership in a school, poor educational outcomes, and so on. And I'm just wondering, do you have a view of how sustainable that process is of transforming? And through your work with the Community Conversation Toolkit, have these issues been dealt with and addressed? Thanks.
Well, I think I'll let Andrew come in and answer some of that question, if that's okay, from the IEF. But what I would say is this is part of the rationale for having that self-evaluation component in the larger Future Schools Toolkit, which embeds community conversations, but also includes the other pieces that were previously missing. So when the schools carry out that self-evaluation process, we saw one of the governors, they say it's a reality check. And, it goes across all 6 sustainable schools criteria and a wide range of indicators. So it's very easy then for a school to identify where they're strong and where they're weak. And that's the first step in the process, carrying out that self-evaluation before you even get to community conversation. Because it may be the outcome of that self-evaluation is pointing towards school closure. If that may be the reality for some schools, whereas for others, it may be greater opportunity then to move forward. But without the critical self-evaluation, it's very difficult to move on to the next stage of a community conversation.
Yeah, thanks for
to
that.
have that evidence on the table first. And it's not just one criteria. It's not just about school size. It's exactly as you indicated. It's around leadership. It's around engagement with the local community. And it's around the quality of education. And it's around putting the needs of the pupils and children first.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if Andrew wants to come in there in terms of...
Just before Andrew comes in, could I just make a quick interjection? We had a discussion with the Education Authority last week, I think it was, on area planning, and one of the issues raised was that, and one of the reasons why some schools are failing is because of poor leadership in the schools, and it appears to be that one of the most difficult issues to address is the replacement of that leadership, or providing the proper support for that leadership, or whatever is necessary, because there's a reluctance to acknowledge or accept on the part of the leadership in the school, or on occasions the local community, who think the leadership is great. So how do you address those issues?
Okay, so I think that's a really, really important point that you've brought up. And what I would say, I know we're mostly talking here about, the future schools and the toolkit, but this really came out of the school governor survey. Remember, very few people have surveyed our school governors across Northern Ireland. Nobody really knows what school governors think or say. And when they were given the opportunity to respond anonymously to our survey, and over 600 of them did, the issue of leadership came up quite a lot. It came up very significantly. It came up even in terms of governors themselves identifying as being ill-prepared to make these kind of decisions around their schools. Issues of leadership and management came up as an issue and a challenge from the school governor perspective. So I think what we've identified wider than what we're talking about today is that there's very many challenges in terms of our governing of schools through the current setup of school governors in the north. And that's something I think that needs to be addressed. I think we'd all feel that quite strongly. There needs to be, it's perhaps an opportunity to really look at, and this might come into the independent review of education, as the governance of schools in Northern Ireland, because many governors have come back to say to us that it's not something that they feel equipped with, and then they feel they're not supported enough from the EA or CCMS in the work that they do. So again, it's pointing to, I mean, from our perspective, it reinforces the need for what we're doing, because the Future Schools Toolkit is about ultimately providing a guidance, a resource, a roadmap for school governors to move forward. Firstly, with self-evaluation, then with engaging with the wider community, and then with setting out a roadmap for moving forwards. So, you know, it's a little bit shocking to see how many school governors identify themselves as being ill-prepared for the work they do, but it also reinforces the need for what we're doing.
Okay, Pat.
Thanks for that, Jessica.
Thank you, Pat. Can I bring in Robin Newton, MLA, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you our guests coming to the meeting this morning. Extremely interesting. I suppose in terms of the work being done, anything that can inform the area planning process and the independent review of education is indeed very worthwhile. I have to say, on the last few words of Dr. Bates there, I have always felt that school governors are asked to take part in what is a very, very important exercise or a role, and they may be selected because of their own skills or knowledge, but those skills and knowledge may not always be a fit with what the development of the school or education in general needs, and yet we never provide them with any, or certainly to my knowledge, we don't provide them with any further development to fit into their role. But can I maybe address my question to Stephen Rolston? I was interested in his comments around the unsustainable schools. Can I just have confirmation first? Is it only primary schools you're looking at? Maybe just answer that question.
It is in this. Sorry.
It's only primary schools.
In this research, it is only primary schools.
Yeah. Okay. That's just confirmation of that. That's what I thought it was. Dr. Rolston, you mentioned the 32 pairs of schools, indicating that 26 of them were unsustainable. Maybe one was unsustainable, the other may. And indeed, you made the comment that it wasn't just by numbers, not always by numbers. So maybe could I ask you to expand on what your findings were there? And indeed, could I ask you maybe to fit into or where the shared education initiative might fit into being considered within the work that you're doing? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Robin, for that. The pairs we looked at, you're quite right, as we said, 26 pairs had either one or both schools unsustainable, but we were defining the unsustainability bit merely on enrolment because we didn't have all of the other data to hand. So in terms of very small schools, we were saying here are schools that might be considered to be a threat in the long term, given that their numbers are less than 105 of enrolment. So we were basing it solely on that criterion for unsustainability, which I know and you've referred to isn't all that unsustainability is measured by. There are other things as well, but we're just saying they're small schools. They're under threat long term, perhaps because of their low enrolments. In terms of, and that's just looking at the Bain thresholds and only that, the Bain thresholds. But I mean, in terms of shared education, we didn't really look at that. The research that refers to was really talking about the problems of duplication. Because there are two sets of principals, there are two sets of ancillary staff, there are two school buildings, there are two canteens, there are two of everything, two school secretaries, two of everything. Sharing wouldn't address that. It might address other issues within the community, but it wouldn't address the duplication bit. So in that research, we were really emphasising the additional cost and duplication of having two sets of schools in each of those little communities, those 32 different communities. We estimated, I think it was at £2.3 million every year on that duplication alone. It was a guess, I suppose, in terms of the exact figure, but a very substantial sum of money being spent just on retaining that duplication. That money wouldn't be saved even if shared education were to roll out, and it is already rolled out in many of those communities. It wouldn't address that additional cost of duplication.
Jessica, did you want to come in on that briefly before Robin comes back in?
I just very briefly wanted just to follow up on a shared education point, a little bit separate from the isolated pairs work. And it's just when it comes to looking at what the longer term sustainable option might be for a particular community. And let's take the example of two small rural schools, neither of which are at the 105 threshold, but where there is a population that would support one school in the area and a desire to see education continue in the area, whatever that might be, whether we're talking about a merged school, an integrated school, whatever that might be, without a good, strong relationship between those schools and an existence of shared education between those schools, it's very difficult to see how they can work together to come together and form one school for that area. So I would just wanted to bring in that point when we had the opportunity to talk about shared education, that without established links between schools in an area, it's very difficult to see how there can then be one school provided, whatever the setup is and the solution is, and that would have to be determined by the community themselves. But there would need to be some relationship. Thanks.
Thanks. Robin?
Thank you, Chair. I'd really, what Dr. Rolston had said was satisfying me. I would, in terms of the point made by Dr. Bates, my experience, limited experience, not at any level of the sort of research that the panel are engaged in, but my experience is that principals and school staff in general are always willing to develop very positive relationships between schools. I don't think I've ever found an unwillingness from principals or indeed board of governors that they wouldn't consider shared education of working together relationship. Just make that point at the end, Chair. But thank the panel. It's very interesting work. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Can I bring in Robbie Butler, MLA, please? And just remind everybody to keep their devices on mute when they're not speaking. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Chair. Thanks for your presentation, guys. A couple of wee things. One of the things that jumped out at me, if you could explain it a wee bit better to me, we talked about having the right school in the right place at the right time. From my background in terms of the fire service, I know a little bit about integrated risk management planning, so I'm very, very au fait with the terminology when it comes to putting fire stations and fire appliances and that type of stuff, and the ability to move those. And that's the gift with the fire service. Some of those things are transportable and movable, but schools aren't. So I can understand the right school, I can understand the right place, but can you define more clearly for me what at the right time means?
Robbie, just that I obviously introduced that terminology, so just to be clear, that's the Education Authority's terminology, not the UNESCO Education Centre, Ulster University's terminology, but the witnesses may still wish to respond to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And to be absolutely clear, these are the decisions that will need to be taken by the current managing authorities and then ultimately by the department when development proposals are signed off. So our role isn't in making those decisions, but it's about helping communities find the right decisions. So the right time would mean both in terms of current demographics in an area and looking into the future. We can't look too far into the future, but we're aware of what housing developments there might be in an area and how demographic change is happening. So it's really about looking and aligning what is needed with the current demographics of an area and working on that more closely. But I mean, the big decisions are the decisions that need to be taken in terms of school estate and provision by the department and the managing authorities. But what we want to do is ensure that the parents are listened to and that they're helping shape and have a much stronger voice in the kind of schools that are provided.
Yeah, I think it's an important one, because I know what the chair said, that it's a departmental education authority statement. However, in terms of the provision of schools, it's incredibly important, this toolkit and what it can do, and if we're in solution mode, because I've talked about this issue for many years, because I was on planning for a little while in Lisbon Council, and there is no conversation. So you could plan to build 2,000 houses, which will house somewhere in the region of 7,500, 10,000 people, and all of those kids, and there's no conversation with regard to with the Department of Education about new schools, what that would be, and it is a bit of a failing for future proofing. No, I really do appreciate that. There was in terms of the sustainability of a school, we had the department's finance lead a number of weeks ago, and what it said was that closure of small schools doesn't necessitate a significant fiscal saving. Or I know that Dr. Wilson had said, there's a 2.3 million in terms of the duplication and stuff. But in terms of the sustainability of schools, is there an over focus on pupil numbers, do you think? I mean, have we quantified this appropriately? Because I think the criteria, there's 6 criteria, but we really only ever focus on one. And I think the Deputy Chair touched on it in terms of that leadership piece. Is there, and I mean, does the toolkit pick this up substantively? Do you think that everything is looked at equitably? And if there is a weighting, would you suggest that there is a weighting to any of those?
Look, it has to be ultimately about the education of our children and young people. And that's where the criteria, come in. So it's about class size. There's a lot of emphasis on composite classes. Is there a point that's reached when you're educating 2, 3, 4 year groups in one room, that the educational quality then and the opportunities for those children and young people is diminished because the teaching time is being split across the different year groups, and that's what's connected then to the school size figure. But very much, and it's emphasised actually in the area plan and the sustainability criteria themselves, that it's not just about size, and we would really echo that. It's about all 6 criteria. And certainly when it comes to the self-evaluation part of the toolkit, the indicators that we're supporting schools to evidence is across all 6 criteria. So there's some that are very easy because they're very easy to gather. You know what your enrolment size is, you know how many teachers you have, and you know what your composite classes situation is. But then there's a whole range of other indicators that come into play. And it wouldn't be for us to provide the weighting because it's about quality of education. Yeah, no, I think that's really good. It's really important because I don't know if I'm sure you have seen it because you guys are all over this stuff, but there's a non-attitudinal poll which was commissioned by the Independent Education Fund. And the Independent Education Fund last June, when they surveyed parents said 84% of them, the most important thing to them was a good educational standard. 51% said then the distance from home was the next most popular. 46% was good learning support, 43% good support, SEN, 43% open to all faiths, and then 40% was the quality of the building. So if we're listening to parents and respecting parental choice, those are really good things to have in. I've just got one final question. Thanks. So in the community conversation, does it identify solutions at all that will result in an unsustainable school having to take action, for instance? Are there solutions, or does it just point out what the issues are? Okay, so the whole point of a conversation is dialogue, and what you're really intending to happen is that the participants themselves start off by agreeing that there is a problem, because that's the first step, and it's not for us to point that out. What we will do is we'll initiate the conversation often by sharing with them some facts, some of the statistics about their schools in the area, how many empty places there are, how close they are located to each other, and what the current sustainable schools criteria are. But it's then for the participants themselves to decide what the problem is, how serious it is, and whether they think that they need to be proactive about it. Because if they're not proactive, the chances they might have to be reactive when they find themselves on an action plan for closure. So it's about being proactive. And then the next stage is, in that collective dialogue, what might have the greatest support going forwards. And in any room, you're going to have a lot of different perspectives and viewpoints. We're not there to say that there's a right way or a wrong way. We're there to help them see what the consensus is. So it's very much a facilitated approach.
That's good. That gives me that's actually really good. Dr. Bates, just a final question then. In regards to ensuring that we get the voices of all the stakeholders involved in this, so say, for instance, to work an example of two schools that aren't too far apart, how do we ensure that within the toolkit is there provision to make sure that, for instance, that every parent gives a response, even if the response is I don't want to take part, so that because there are some people who are incredibly articulate, literate, communicative, and then there are other people who, for many different reasons or a time in their life, they don't have the capacity. Is there something in there to ensure that we get everybody's voice when we're doing that?
Yeah, I'll just give you the examples of how we've done this in the past. So our belief is what's important is to give everybody the equal opportunity to participate. And then, as you say, they can decide whether they want to or not. So when we're actually carrying out community conversations on the ground, it's not one meeting or one conversation. It's a series of conversations and events. They'll be offered at different times of day and night. Before COVID, we were doing physical visits. So we were embedding ourselves in an area, finding a neutral community space or several different community spaces and inviting people to come for morning meetings, evening meetings. We've done then a very large meeting that brings everyone together in one room. And then also we would always offer the opportunity of participating and giving feedback online. So in parallel to these either virtual or face-to-face conversations, there'd be the opportunity to add online responses. And that's recognizing that maybe the times of our meetings just don't suit people in terms of their caring responsibilities or work, but also maybe that's just somebody's preference about how they'd like to respond. So for us, it's fundamental that everybody in an area has equal opportunity to participate. And normally when we've done these, we would invite schools to send the communication home to all of their parents so they're all equally informed. And we would also then carry out a series of, sort of promoting the events through the community and through non-school specific sites. The other thing I should just mention as well, it's very important to us to include not just parents of primary age children, but as parents of preschool children. And that's where a lot of our activity has been, but particularly in the case studies we're doing at the moment in terms of just continuing to refine what we would need to put in the toolkit around community conversations. We've been doing work on the ground in 2 different rural areas at the moment with parents of preschool children.
That's actually really, no question, but I'm really pleased to hear that bit at the end, because I think you wait till they're in primary school, it's already done, kind of a done deal, and then you're looking at change, and change is always hard to manage. So those early conversations are excellent. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Robbie. Are children included in the conversation as well, Jessica?
Well, that would be the ideal. Obviously, that would be the ideal scenario. We would love to see that. We're just being very pragmatic at the moment because this is a very much a ring-fenced project in terms of time and funding. And for all of the work that we do as Ulster researchers, it all goes through quite a rigorous ethical approval process. And the ethical approval process for gathering and engaging with children and young people is much more stringent and time consuming than talking to adults. So it's not within the very narrow confines of this particular project, but we would strongly encourage that, obviously. And if other people have the opportunity to adapt and apply our work and include children and young people, we would want to see them have a voice. That's the next bit of work that's needed to be done.
That's encouraging. I find some of the children and young people I talk to talk significantly more sense than some of the adults I talk to. But look forward to that being part of the project as well. In no way related to the comment that I just made, can I bring Daniel McCrossan, MLA, in, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our guests for taking our questions. I'll go straight to it because I know time's going to be tight. The paper quotes the New Decade New approach when it states the education system has a diversity of school types, each with its own distinct ethos and values. However, it is not sustainable. I appreciate these are not your words, but in the spirit of independence and rigour, can you tell me, if you were asked to establish criteria for sustainable schools, what would that criteria be? And also, do you agree with the number of 105 enrolment for primary schools and 500 for post-primary?
Thanks very much. So in terms of the first question related to, sorry, Daniel, can you repeat the first question?
Yeah, so basically, if you were asked to establish criteria for sustainable schools, what would your criteria be?
So I think at the moment, the criteria, you've got 6 criteria, and from each criteria, you have a range of indicators. And what's really important is that those indicators are both qualitative and quantitative. So you have your statistical numerical indicators, but equally you have those more qualitative, and to some extent they can be slightly harder to evidence criteria around engagement and embedding with the local community and things like that. And I know that the New Decade New Approach states very clearly that the current system isn't sustainable, but we're not about cancelling out any particular types of schools or school sectors. It really is about finding what is the most sustainable way forward for individual communities. In terms of actual numbers, I don't think that's really for us to say. I mean, that's educational policy. What our role here is to help support communities, demonstrate whether they're meeting the criteria or not. I think we'd feel very strongly that there needs to be a range of criteria, that it can't be reduced to a specific number in a specific area, that you need to take in that qualitative, local, area-based understanding as well. Distance to next nearest school, for example, is going to be really important. You know, if you're just looking at the numbers of a school and you're not looking at the distance to the next nearest school, then you need to look at a whole range of factors.
Yeah, that really points to the flaw of the current policy then, and causes considerable issues for rural communities such as the ones that I represent, and many others on this committee as well. The 105 issue presents considerable difficulties for many very good rural schools. What emphasis would you give to high standards of maintaining a school as viable? And I would also like to know, what emphasis would you give to promoting diversity of school within our overall school system?
So, I mean, it comes back to having a range of criteria and indicators, doesn't it? Because we know there's good schools in rural areas, and it's about giving them the opportunity to demonstrate that and to evidence it. And the stronger they can evidence that, then the more they are being proactive about their future, because they're evidencing where their success is and where their quality is. In terms of diversity, again, that's a question for communities, because we've said very clearly it's not for us as researchers to predetermine what what choice of school there is. That's for what communities and what families will support. And the only way we can answer that is through gathering evidence and actually engaging with communities.
Okay. Do you believe that small rural communities can have their, and this is what I've really talked about, it's been a symptom of the closure of rural schools. It's really ripped the heart out of many of them. So do you believe that small rural communities can have their heart torn from them when the local school closes?
Without a shadow of a doubt, Daniel, that's written into our work. That's why we're doing this work, is to see, what if you have an area where there is a school that is, not meeting criteria across a range of different indicators, not just school size. Is there a longer term solution for that area that can be found to ensure that education continues in that location? And what would that look like, and what would have the support of that community? And to then evidence that in a way that will lead to, development proposals or realistic change. But it's all about supporting the communities to do that. I'm not sure, Stephen, if you want to come in on that point.
Well, I think it's an opportunity to stress something that was raised earlier about small schools. I mean, we're not saying that small schools need to close. We're not arguing that at all. There are enormous benefits that are found within small schools. There's better communication among the staff and parents, greater one-to-one interaction. And all of our surveys have shown that parents actually value that. The parents of children in small schools really, some of them have chosen deliberately to send their child to a small school to get that a personal touch that they might lose in the larger school. And even composite classes, and I know that's often taken as a measure of unsustainability of a school if you have a lot of composite classes, but actually composite classes, if run well, offer lots of advantages as well. So you've got younger pupils teaching older pupils, and peer tutoring, and reciprocal learning, and all manner of things that you can do with composite classes. I know it's a challenge for the teacher, but it's not necessarily a measure of poor education having composite classes. And as you've said, these places are at the heart of villages. And if you take a school out of that, you're talking about very long journey times, often with very young children having to go to another school nearby to travel. So we're not saying that small schools are necessarily substandard education at all. There are other arguments to say that there are issues with smaller schools, but actually there are a lot of benefits with small schools as well.
Yeah, and even beyond that, when I talk about tearing the heart out of a rural community, it's the rippling consequences of it, because often families then decide whether or not that particular rural community is the right place to rear their family. There is then an economic challenge that emerges because of services that are no longer sustainable as a consequence of families not being in the rural community. And we're really seeing that play out in a very, very worrying way right across parts of Tyrone and Fermanagh and other areas as well. You know, there's been quite a lot of services removed as a result of, I suppose, the shrinking population base, but the closure of rural schools is really a defining factor in whether a family decide to stay in a particular rural community or not, particularly when they themselves were reared indeed in that community. So it is very much a very worrying situation. Just a final point as well. Did you explore with the parents whether they were content that the criteria being applied in relation to sustainability enjoyed their confidence? I know, Jessica, you touched slightly on that earlier.
To be honest now, with parents, we were more discussing what their perspectives were in terms of school preferences in an area. And if it came to concerns around sustainability, what would become their priorities? I mean, is it about sending their child to a school of a particular ethos? Is it about sending their child to the nearest primary school, regardless of school sector? And it was more about establishing and moving beyond. If there's if it comes to having an issue around school closures in this particular area, whether it's one school or another or both schools, what would be your preference moving forward? What would have your support? So we didn't really drill into them with the specifics around the criteria. The focus of looking at the criteria was much more with the boards of governors. And of course, remember, there's also parent representatives on the board of governors. So that's where we focused discussions around the criteria themselves. With parents, it was more of a qualitative conversation around what would have their support and what their priorities would be, because if you're going to restructure education provision to keep a school provision in a geographic area, it's about finding what would have support. And of course, what we want to see in rural areas is a strong provision. That's not just, I mean, we know we're talking about primary school provision here, but it's about that school becoming a centre and a hub within the local community. So it's about the wraparound care and the preschool care and supporting other community activities and opportunities within the community beyond the primary school, so that the school has other uses as well.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow on a slight point, Chair, with Dr. Rolston as well. I was thinking about what you had said about the benefits of composite classes, and I think it's important as well to point out that it's not just small schools that have composite classes. Of course, when schools reach figures of over 240 pupils, so post-primary schools, they start having composite classes again. Primary schools. This continues until around 350 pupils when they have two of every class in the school. So there is benefits there. And I think we really should be highlighting them a wee bit more as well. I think that the justification for closing rural schools to say the composite classes isn't in the best interest of children isn't entirely accurate. And unfortunately, it's something that is peddled quite often. But thank you very much for taking questions from us. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Probably depends on how many composite classes are in the composite class, but yeah. Okay. Thanks, Daniel. Can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for your presentation this morning. It's a really interesting topic, and I suppose as someone who was born and reared in a rural area and who now represents rural West Tyrone, I suppose it's something I have particular interest in, and I've been working very closely with a couple of local primary schools actually that are under threat of closure at the moment. And I suppose what I kind of want to ask initially is, I know from working with them, they're already having that community conversation and trying to figure out ways in which they can remain open. So can you explain to me what the kind of difference is from the conversation they might be having and then the approach that you are suggesting, that your method is suggesting?
Thanks, Nicola. I think that the real strength of this approach is that it brings in that independent facilitation. So it can be quite hard to bring different school communities together, as I'm sure you know from your own work. And having that independent facilitation just gives schools that kind of space to, and communities that space to engage with each other, but under the sort of the neutral support. Because when we do these conversations, there's no agenda for us. It's just about moving things forward in whatever way will support the community. And we have a series of questions that we can use to shape the conversation to help them reach whatever outcomes will be appropriate in that particular context. So that's the main difference. Of course, you know, schools, it's encouraging to see schools being proactive and communities being proactive and initiating those conversations, but there may come a point for some communities where it's helpful to have that facilitated intervention.
No, absolutely, Jessica. I think that's something that schools and communities have kind of come up against before. And I think it would have actually been very helpful for some of the examples I have actually that if it had some kind of independent facilitator in the middle, you know, many years ago. So I think that is a very helpful approach. Can you also just tell me at kind of what stage of the process do you envisage yourselves coming in? Is it when you see numbers dropping below the 105 or the kind of trends in the population in the area dropping and you think there's a risk to the school, or is it whenever there is a severe risk and if there's a developmental proposal put forward to close the school?
I think we can have limited impact once that stage of development proposals has been reached, because that's the point where decisions really have already been made. So the whole impact of this work is prior to that. And we've heard a lot from governors and parents that the desire and want to be proactive and not reactive. So it's about working with schools where there is a desire, a recognition that the current status probably, you know, isn't sustainable in the long term. And then it's about, well, first of all, self-evaluation. Secondly, then having a conversation on the ground with all stakeholders. And then thirdly, setting out what a roadmap might look like and seeing what there's support for. So really it's that exploratory phase before schools find themselves on an action plan that is really important. So, you know, the schools on an action plan are probably maybe the very small schools that have a range of different issues around sustainability, not just one around numbers. And then our work would be for the schools in the next bracket above that.
Okay, I understand that.
At risk to being unsustainable.
Do you, and although you're saying that there, which I totally understand, do you think you would have the scope to help a school who was maybe being instructed that they were due to close, but had maybe visions of, you know, creating like a joint faith model or an integrated kind of school? Would you still have scope to open up that their community conversation at that stage, or do you think is it too late?
No, I think it's about evidencing where they see that as being sustainable. So coming back to the self-evaluation criteria, how we would really like to see that being used is not just a self-evaluation of individual schools, but applying that self-evaluation rubric to what they see as the potential solution. So if you two schools saying, look, neither of us are sustainable, but we really, really don't want to be on this list for closure, we think there is a model that will work. Well, apply the self-evaluation rubric to that model. And if you can evidence that it's sustainable, then have the conversation. And that will be very difficult then for planning authorities and management authorities to ignore, because what they want to see is proactive evidence. They've said to us they would be delighted if schools wanted to do that, because that's what they want to see. So it's not just self-evaluating an individual school, but it's actually applying that rubric to what the solution might be.
I think that's a really helpful kind of tip, Jessica, because often what happens is a school is earmarked for closure, and then that drives other parents away going, I'm not going to send my child there to P1 whenever they might have to move them in a year or two's time, you know. So I think that's a really important tip. Listen, thanks so much. I think that's a really interesting topic, as I say, and something that I am interested in. So I really do appreciate all of your time this morning. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. Folks, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning. Stephen, Jessica, Andrew, Una, really valuable evidence. We're entirely out of time, unfortunately, but thanks so much. I think as an education committee, we'll be asking the education minister in what way this work is being embedded and mainstreamed in the area planning process, and we'll be glad to keep in touch with you in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity today to talk to the Education Committee.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, can I ask broadcasting to remove the witnesses and to add members into the spotlight, and ask the clerk to summarise any actions resulting from the briefing? Thanks.
Chair, thank you. That was really interesting. The genesis of the Future Schools project in the School Governors Survey, and you know, that whole explanation about governors self-analysing and evaluating and identifying, coming to this this need for data before a conversation can happen, before a roadmap can be ascertained, before an action plan can be agreed. I mean, it's a very interesting process, and really the action, you've said it already. The action that I think the committee would wish to take is to ask the Education Minister. I mean, I know that the Future Schools team have been working with area planning officials in the department for some time, but yeah, just to see if that is going to be embedded and mainstreamed in the area planning process, to establish a network of viable and sustainable schools. As discussed, you know, schools that are of the right type, the right size, in the right place, and at the right time. Do members have anything additional to add to our actions?
Members want to add or content to agree?
Content, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, members. Okay. Thank you, Clerk. I'll move then to agenda item 8, our oral briefing from Parenting NI on the Big Parenting Survey 2021. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove members and add witnesses, and refer members to the Parenting NI Big Parenting Survey 2021 report at page 159 and the Parenting NI presentation at page 46. Can I give a very warm welcome to Charlene Brooks, Chief Executive Officer of Parenting NI, and Conal Baxter, Senior Policy and Research Officer of Parenting NI. I'm delighted to welcome you both to the Education Committee. I know we've had long and extremely positive engagement with you both and Parenting NI as an organisation across a wide range of issues. So delighted that we have this opportunity to hear from you on the Big Parenting Survey for 2021. And you'll have up to 10 minutes for your opening statement before questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that warm introduction. I'm going to start by just introducing Parenting NI, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Conal, who's actually going to give you a presentation within that 10 minutes. So Parenting NI, we're a regional parent support charity. It's our business to deliver support and services to parents and families across Northern Ireland, but also to gain the voices and gain an insight into the realities of parenting. Thus, we decided to start conducting a big parenting survey, and we've been running it consecutively every other year for 3 years. And this year we ran it in the period between October to November 2021, and the findings launched now early 2022. So our aim of the survey really is to give parents from all walks of life that voice, give them the spotlight, tell us about their experiences, tell us the honesty, the realities of parenting in Northern Ireland. We know given the pandemic, things have been even more heightened, so it's arguably more important than ever to hear from parents. So on that note, I'm going to pass you over to Conal, my colleague, who's going to give you a brief run through of the main survey findings.
Thank you, Charlene. I'm just going to share my screen just to get a PowerPoint up. I hope everyone is able to see that, and thank you, Chair, for having us. So first of all, just some of the key findings that we had from the big parenting survey. So overall, 87% of parents felt that they did not get enough support, and this is actually up 5% from 2019. 57% of parents, are more worried than hopeful about the future, and while this is an improvement from 2019, it's still quite concerning. 32% of parents indicated that the COVID pandemic has had a lot of negative impact on their own emotional and mental health, and 1 in 5 parents reported a low level of emotional and mental health at the moment. We asked parents to tell us what their hopes for their children are. And we give them these seven things to rank in order, and overall parents wanted their children to be happy, to be healthy, and achieve a good education. Those are the 3 things first and foremost. We asked parents then to elaborate on some of these things as well. And some parents did tell us then afterwards that they felt that their children are taught that they have to be academic and do well at everything, whereas most parents want their children to be first and foremost happy and healthy, and the ranking system above backs that up. Another parent said that children should have access to education and employment opportunities to suit their needs, and not just what society or the system dictates. So I think that's around making sure they're happy in what they're doing as well, and not forced into something that they don't want to do. So we asked parents what currently helps them achieve these hopes. So good family support is the first thing, is first and foremost, followed by strong social networks and community support. So parents said that the drive to go and achieve their goals helps them achieve their hopes for their child, and building a strong relationship with their children. We asked parents, do they think their hopes are achievable in Northern Ireland at the moment? So almost half of parents who participated in the survey said yes. 27% of parents said they did not think their hopes were achievable in Northern Ireland, and 28% didn't know. Around parent emotional health and well-being at the moment, we asked parents to rank how they're sort of feeling at the moment on a scale between 1 and 10. Where 1 to 4 was really low levels and parents not really coping too well. 5 to 7, parents sort of feeling okay, and 8 to 10 on the ranking scale, parents they were in a pretty good place at the moment. So 37% of parents reported high levels of emotional well-being, mental health at the moment, so that's quite good. 44% of parents reported a medium level of emotional well-being and mental health, and just under a fifth, 1 in 5 parents were really struggling and reported a low level of emotional well-being and mental health at the moment. Overall, the average comes out about 6.5 on the scale, which is slightly down from 2019 as well. With COVID, we asked parents to tell us how much COVID has negatively affected their emotional health and well-being at the moment. Again, using the same scale, 1 to 4, with a lot of negative impact, 5 to 7, sort of okay, and 8 to 10 saying not so much. So 1 in 4 parents, 28%, responded that the pandemic had not a lot of negative impact on their emotional and mental health. 2 in 5 parents indicated that COVID has had some negative impact on their emotional and mental health, and just under a third, 32% of parents, said that COVID has had a lot of negative impact on their emotional and mental health. We asked parents as well to rank, what their top concerns were in the last 6 months of the investigative period. At the top of the parents' concerns were their child's education, followed by their child's mental health and fear and anxiety from COVID. 14% of parents answered with an other, and most of the comments in this section were around death in the family and work-life balance. Just some things parents said to us as well. They said that juggling lockdowns with full-time work from home and schooling was really tough, and some parents did also comment that they were looking at additional educational support for their child who is clinically extremely vulnerable as well. So we asked parents as well what type of support they would like to receive, and overall, online support came out on top, which was good, followed by face-to-face support in a venue, and followed by support group with parents. So any support around this, we sort of take these results, meaning a hybrid response or hybrid method will probably be best for the future. We asked this following a question on did parents think they got enough support, and as I said before, 87% of parents said they did not get enough support. Around biggest challenges for parents, again, we asked parents to tell us the top 3 challenges they face as well. Mental health came out at the top of 53%. Technology came out at 52%, and changes in society came out at 33%. Some of the other ones as well. School was a massive challenge for parents at 14%. Bullying at 21% was other key challenges for parents. And again, parents elaborated on this in the comment section as well, and many of them talked about the work-life balance is a big challenge for them. Poor support for special educational needs to help their child was another one. So there was many challenges that parents face, and I think some of them are very much related as well. Regarding the future, we asked parents, are they more hopeful or worried about the future? And 57% of parents said they were more worried than hopeful. As I said, these figures are better than 2019. And again, parents were able to elaborate on this as well. And some told us that the reason they were more worried is, they have an increase in outgoings to provide appropriate educational support, i.e. laptops for their children, which they say they need now, with homeschooling. Some parents with children who had special educational needs worried what will happen after their GCSE year. And other parents were worried around, social interaction among children and young people, that it's becoming more restricted to schooling online, and they were worried about their child's interpersonal skills in the future as a result of this. So we did come up with some recommendations that did come around the key themes that came out of this report. So the top one was around parent mental health. We would suggest parent-specific mental health interventions were to be developed. Around parent support, as we said, parents did have a range of views on what type of support they would like in the future. So possibly hybrid is probably something to work towards. And then with COVID, we know COVID has affected lots of different areas in life, and we would just ask that any policies that are being developed in the future that have parents are considered at the outset, to ensure that they are parent-proofed as well as child-proofed too. And some of them we find aren't spectacular at that. Just a bit of background to the research itself. The investigative period was October to November, so this is before Omicron as well. 730 responses from parents who had 1,669 children. And the responses were fairly representative around the council areas in Northern Ireland as well. The most common number of children in families with 2 was about 47 or 45%, and then there's a big drop off in big families as well. Majority of parents indicated that they were married. There's about 72%, and the largest single age bracket of parents who answered the survey was 35 to 44. So some other stats that we have that weren't in the presentation but I thought might be useful for the committee today. The parents who answered this, there are 10% of their children, of parents' children were in preschool, 34% were in primary school, 14% in secondary school, 15% in grammar school, and 4% in integrated schools. 30% of parents said their children had special educational needs, and 16% of parents who answered this said that their children were on free school meals as well. So I'm sure the committee knows we do provide lots of other support services too, and I'm sure we'll be happy to speak about those as well. And thank you very much. I'm conscious that I had 10 minutes, so I tried to keep it to that.
Conal, Charlie, thanks so very much indeed for that opening presentation. And let me take this opportunity on behalf of the Education Committee to give a very sincere thanks to Parenting Northern Ireland for all the support that you provide to parents and families across Northern Ireland, and indeed for this invaluable research that you've carried out to help guide policy and practice in Northern Ireland. The report, Charlene, states that rather than to use the survey as a call to action to make Northern Ireland the best place to raise a family. So I suppose my key question for you is to what extent is support provided to parents to help achieve this aim at this moment in time? I note that the family and parenting support strategy has not been progressed during the past 2 years, and that there is an intention for a draft strategy to issue for consultation in late 2022. Do you want to speak to any of those matters?
Yes, certainly. I mean, yes, it's a very ambitious call to action in that we want Northern Ireland essentially to be a place where parents choose to stay and bring up their children. I think it's a very positive environment. I think what we have recognised, what we know and we've really recognised with the results of this survey is that we've all got a collective responsibility. It's not solely down to any one given department or even commissioner with regards to the commissioning of services. There's exceptionally high numbers of parents have indicated that they need further support. So for us, it's about defining, well, what is that support? Is that a service or an initiative such as our organisation at Parenting and I can provide? Is that home visiting, one-to-one? Is it a parenting programme? And the answer is yes, sometimes, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's more about what extended family can do. Sometimes in our experience, parents are saying they need support when they're going through a particularly difficult time. That could be a separation, could be a bereavement. So it's very hard to define exactly what support any parent needs at any given time. But what I do think we can do, and we always try to be solution focused as opposed to just present the challenge and not solutions, is really help encourage people to think of parents. I think some of the challenges we perceive is that sometimes parents just fall into the shadows. So much is just asked and tasked upon them. So when schools are closed, the parents are at home and they're supporting their child's learning, but they're also being asked to still go to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and they're also maybe struggling financially and they haven't got the support from their extended family. So let's see those parents, let's hear them, let's value them, let's try and understand, even if I'm somebody in a community, what can I do to help those parents that I know that may be struggling, that live near me? I'm in a school situation, what can we do as a school environment to help engage our parents more so that they do feel they have that support? If I'm a voluntary sector service, what can we do? So I think my answer, and it's probably a very long-winded answer, Chris, apologies. So it's really that it's a collective responsibility and we all need to take account of how we can support parents.
I think that's a very helpful, comprehensive answer, Charlene. To press you a little bit, how important do you think a family and parenting support strategy is to leading that, seeing, that valuing, that supporting of parents to make the contribution we need them to make in our society?
Definitely think there's a huge opportunity with it, Chris, that goes without saying. As yet, we have not had sight of it. So I suppose what I would be asking, and I have been talking to officials within the Department of Health, is let's engage parents in a meaningful way. So I admire that many departments really do make an attempt to engage parents, and they have done, and there is an increasing note upon how important that is. But it's more about engaging. It's more about consulting with parents when the draft strategy has been written. Let's bring parents around the table from the very outset. We're talking about a strategy for parents and families. So therefore, why not work with parents and families to help develop that strategy? So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but what I would say needs to happen at the first or the earliest stage is let's see how we can engage parents. And also, and this is just a very brief point, but it's something I feel quite passionately about in Parenting and I, let's not engage the parents. And I noted one of the other MLAs mentioned earlier that are articulate, that are already engaged in many events and are very happy to put their hand up and stand up and take account. Let's really try to look at those parents who aren't in that situation and be really as reflective as we can across the diverse needs of parents across Northern Ireland. So I think there's a lot of work for the department to do, but lots of opportunity.
Thanks, Charlene. I think you and I first met a decade ago on a photo appearance on a childcare survey. How important is the delivery of affordable, accessible, quality early education and childcare to parenting support in Northern Ireland?
Well, childcare is without doubt a massive pressure for many parents and families. We specifically didn't ask direct questions about childcare within the survey because we know we've some very good colleagues within the sector that already carry out that childcare cost survey. So what we want to do is complement rather than duplicate or replicate. So we didn't ask any direct questions. However, it came up time and time again within the open-ended questions, as you can imagine, because childcare absolutely puts additional significant, not only financial, but emotional pressure on parents. So therefore, we have contributed to the innovation labs. We've been working with the Department of Education. I think it's absolutely imperative that we have a childcare structure resource within Northern Ireland that is going to meet the needs of many working parents.
Thanks, Charlene. Can I bring in Pat Sheehan, MLA Deputy Chairperson, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Arlene and Connell for your presentation there. Yeah, and 87% of parents, according to the survey, feel they need more support. And you gave a list of what they want. There's a large percentage wanted online support, some wanted counselling, and so on. And I suppose that this is following on from Chris's last question in terms of, is this a survey that just goes onto the shelf and then we compare it with the next survey in a couple of years? Or is there an action plan there? And who has responsibility for implementing an action plan? Who has responsibility for ensuring that parents do get more support in the time ahead? I wonder, do you have a view on that? Thanks.
Well, certainly there's certainly a view in what we would like to see happen. Obviously, we are a charity with fairly limited resources. So how we see our role is that we're the conduit. We are the vehicle to present those parent voices to the likes of yourselves, to the decision makers, to the commissioners, to the departments. So that is very much our role. And we have already been round and met with department officials from Department of Education and Department of Health so that these results can be used in a meaningful way. Obviously, we can't guarantee that that's going to happen. And it would be absolutely heartbreaking to think that this is one of those surveys that just goes on the dust, gathers dust on the shelf, Pat. But I understand your concerns about that because that does happen all too readily. So all I can really say is that we need to ensure that us, obviously, as a charity who are leading and spearheading this research, but also ultimately everyone has a responsibility to then ensure that the policymakers and the commissioners really do take account of what parents are saying. And there is a responsibility, I would say, upon the departments, particularly the Department of Health. And to be fair, we are working closely with them. And I have been linking in with their family policy unit, and they've been very engaged with the results of the survey. So I would be hopeful that this will help shape some of their thinking around the likes of the family and parenting strategy, which Chris has already referenced. And we will continue, Pat, with our resources as much as we can to ensure that that voice of parents is featured. You'll note in one of the recommendations, for example, the COVID recovery plan. The COVID recovery plan, which is very comprehensive, parents are mentioned once. So again, it's about taking responsibility to ensure parents are actually named, that they can see themselves and where they fit in the development of these plans. So we will continue to challenge and we will continue to ensure that we try to have parents' voices represented around the table as much as we certainly can.
Thanks for that, Charlene. And if there was one single issue which, if it was implemented, would help parents, have you a view yourself of what that might be?
I think it's hard to not consider mental health, Pat, and the implications of mental health. 33% of parents indicated that the COVID pandemic has had a negative impact on them. 1 in 5 parents are suggesting that they have a low mental health and well-being at the moment. That gives us significant concern. The one thing I would ask is that when we're thinking about children and young people and their mental health, we also think of parents, so that we don't automatically think of parachuting services into children and not consider the parents at home and the wider family circuit, that we think of whole families and we think of what can we do to support those parents. It doesn't naturally always mean that the parents need counselling. Far from it. Sometimes it is simply a listening ear. Sometimes it's affirmation of what they're doing is the best they can do at that time. It can be peer support. It could be their extended family. But what I would suggest that if we had one firm action, it's to really invest in parents' mental health and well-being.
Okay, thanks for that. And just finally, Chair, one quick question. What impact is the cost of living crisis having on parents? Is there any indication of that in the survey? Thanks.
Conal might come in with anything additional. We didn't ask any specific questions around the financial impact of COVID, but again, there was certainly some anecdotal feedback, particularly those parents who maybe had been on some of the furlough schemes, for example, for a period of time, and then they became out of work or redundant for whatever reason. So there was certainly a nod to that in the open-ended questions. It wasn't something we specifically asked. Conal, you may have further data to hand if there was further reference to that in the survey.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Because this survey was conducted sort of October, November time, it was before the cost of living and the inflation got sky highs, and that's really in the last sort of month and a half or so. But however, that money still came out as fourth in the biggest challenge for parents. So 1 in 3 parents roughly still said that money was one of their biggest challenges. So it's not that it wasn't there before, but it's definitely going to be exacerbated now. And all the other money, for example, money challenges would have affected other issues, as in with parents with their mental health. Could get worse mental health if they're worrying about money, or if they couldn't provide extra equipment to facilitate a child's education, or things like that. So money is still about there. It just wasn't completely at the top. It was fourth in the biggest challenge.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. Can I bring in Robin Newton, MLA, please? Thanks. Robin, I think we lost you there. Your audio there.
Right. Am I on track?
We're back at it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Can I thank Charlene and Conal for being with us today in the presentation. My concerns are really around the same area as previously. The parental concerns on as outlined on certainly on the slide are page 53, and then on the parental support outlined on page 54. I suppose I'll limit my question really to, well, I suppose let me say I agree with a comment there by Charlene in terms of childcare structures and the necessity to invest in our childcare structures in order to fully facilitate very changing lifestyles of parents in working from home, working in shifts, working at different times of the day and different times of the night. I had a family in with me, Chair, just as an example to Charlene, where the husband was employed working in a global context and working online in a global context, which meant he had to work sometimes at 2 and 3 in the morning as opposed to 9 to 5. And the wife in a similar situation, although she was working part-time home and part-time in the office, and trying to raise 2 kiddies in that kind of environment and get support in that kind of environment was finding challenging for them. Can I maybe just ask a question? How widely shared is this report? And really to follow up on Charlene, your last identification as mental health being the one to really target at this moment to address for parents. And are you presenting to the health committee on that?
Well, certainly the report has been disseminated throughout all of our networks, so it has been disseminated across all main political parties, and we've indeed had meetings with many involved with those political parties. We've also had a face-to-face meeting with the mental health champion from the Department of Health, and she's been very supportive and understanding of the results. We've also obviously engaged with the Minister in the Department of Health and some of his officials and the Family Policy Unit. We have not as yet identified a window to present to the Health Committee, but you make a very good point, and we'll put that on the list to try and see. Obviously it's up to them at the end of the day, but we'll try and see if that's something they would be keen to engage us in. So the report does be disseminated fairly widely, and we will continue, even just within our voluntary communities, third sector, we will continue to share the results and the findings, and I suppose ultimately it's up to them to then use those findings and use them to help shape the policy and resources, Robin, as a consequence of that.
Charlene, I wonder, have you given any consideration also to communities committee? You have, right, okay.
Yeah, we probably don't have, I'll be honest, as strong a links in with communities, but that's certainly an area, because obviously we're very well aware of the crossover with the sector and with the work of the Department of Communities as well. So that's certainly on our agenda, and we'd be very, very keen to engage more, even on an ongoing basis, with the Department of Communities. We do a lot of work with single parents, separated parents. We do a lot of work with particularly dads, who we see as a particularly marginalised group at times when their voice is not often featured around the table. So there's lots of things that we could be doing that would help influence some of the Department of Communities work, without doubt. And that's a priority for us to engage more effectively with them.
Okay. Well, look, can I thank both of you for that. It's interesting work, and obviously you'll update it at a later stage, and particularly around the cost of living issue, which I've no doubt will become more and more an important factor in placing stress on families. So thank you indeed, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Robin. Can I bring in Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Hello. Yes, Chair. Thank you. Thanks very much for those presentations and for taking questions so far. I will say that the findings of your report are very similar to what we found through an SDLP survey in the summer. So very cross-cutting in terms of some of those findings, which is reassuring as well. The survey is wide-ranging in its scope, and conclude that overall parents are reporting they still are struggling to receive support. What three problems in particular would you like to draw to the attention of the policymakers in this regard, and how, in your opinion, can these issues be addressed?
So what we try to do is be the vehicle for the parents' voice, as opposed to us often as an organisation drawing conclusions. So the three main areas that parents have identified within the survey are education, and that is new. We ran this big parenting survey 3 times, and education has never featured as highly, perhaps unsurprisingly, given the COVID pandemic and the implications of home learning and things like that. I think that there is a piece of work to do to reassure, rebuild relationships with schools and parents. I do believe that parents are concerned that their child's education has been adversely impacted. I can hear that perhaps there's lots of opportunity for children to catch up. Lots of people don't like that language, but I think it's that piece around providing some kind of reassurance to parents about the huge gaps and the gaps that they continue to experience. We have parents who've spoken to us recently, and since December, their children have mostly been out of school again because of waves of COVID within the family homes and the impact that that's having on the loss of education. So I think there's a piece of work that could be done, which is around looking at how do you support parents and reassure them in that situation about the gaps that there maybe has been because I don't think that's been considered. Mental health I've already touched on. I do feel that sometimes, again, there's a misunderstanding about the links between the importance of investing in parents' mental health, and sometimes the focus is on children. It's not to take away the focus from children at all. Children's emotional health and well-being absolutely should be a #1 priority, but we must not forget that a parent who is struggling with their mental health and well-being, that will inevitably have an impact on their child and young person if they are not supported. If they are supported, there is no reason why that child will have a negative outcome. But it's all about investing in and supporting parents in that way. So those would be sort of the top issues that I would suggest that we really need to consider moving forward on, and taking action collectively, and taking responsibility to see how we can address those issues for parents. And the other thing I just want to touch on is the number, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, is 87% of parents say they don't get enough support. That does not always mean that needs to be a formalised intervention or support. That could simply be better engagement and support from their child's school. That could be better support from their partner, from their extended family. So support is very broad, and for us as a charity, we're also looking at, in subsequent surveys, asking more clear definitions of what does that support look like. So if 87% of people are saying they need support, what is that they actually need? So hopefully that goes some way to answer that question, Daniel.
Yes, thanks very much. And just in relation to that, what particular role do you see this education committee playing in that regard?
I think it was really important, and I really value the opportunity to speak to you all, particularly because the two of the big issues that have been flagged are around education and mental health, which I know is high on the agenda for the Education Committee. So I think obviously your prowess and your influence, and your understanding of the importance of positioning parents and giving parents that platform is exceptionally helpful. So I think even you going forward as committee members, with always the view that we need to think of parents. How have we engaged parents? How are parents named within this strategy? How are we going to see parents being involved moving forward? So just keep that in the front of your mind. For us, it is a considerable success.
Okay, thank you. Just in relation to the negative effects of COVID-19 on our children, particular concerns for preschool children. Many of our very young children have been deprived of opportunities to mix with develop language skills. I am of the opinion that the detrimental effects of this are to date largely unrecognised. I think that quite a number have raised concerns in relation to it. Was there any part of your survey that concentrated on early years, and did any of the parents express concerns for this area?
So again, I'll ask Conal to come in a moment just about the breakdown. We can run breakdown specifically on the age group of parents' children, because we did ask that question, and we can identify how many respondents had children of that nursery age. Off the top of my head, Daniel, I don't believe there's a significant number of parents with that demographic that have responded to this survey. I suppose in its very nature, it's very broad, and we're asking really about parents and their emotional health, well-being, the support that they need. So those parents in a situation you've described with their child maybe in that nursery environment, and struggling with those transitions, they maybe haven't conveyed that within our survey. That does not mean that is not a significant concern, because we know it absolutely is. Conal, is there anything in specific we can pull out with regards to that preschool age group, or the numbers even of respondents?
Yeah, so we had, I think, preschool parents with children in preschool was 10%, so it's quite quite a dip. So the sample size would be much smaller. So the results wouldn't be as reliable. However, while it's not included in the report, I did run some reports on the different demographics, and there wasn't a huge variation of parents' concerns within sort of really many of the demographics, to be honest. So there's nothing really significant so far that I could pull out, but I would be able to run those numbers and get the exact findings if you'd like. But as I said, the sample size would be much smaller.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Can I have a final question, Chair?
Final question, Daniel. Thanks.
I note that the survey identified 1/3 of parents reported changes in society as their greatest challenge. Can you be more specific about what these changes in society are and why they are so challenging? Now, the obvious ones is COVID and all sorts of other bits and pieces that have been very, very recent over the last 2 years. But what in particular jumps out for you?
One of the big changes in society that comes through, not only with this survey, but time and time again with lots of our work with parents, is to do with the digital world. And parents are quite honestly feeling at sea quite frequently with regards to how the fast pace the digital world is moving and how potentially vulnerable their children and young people are as a consequence of that. So children using online platforms, social media platforms, the amount of time that they're spending on digital devices, accessing games that are perhaps age inappropriate for them, sexting, child sexual exploitation, all of those sorts of issues that come into that online world and gaming. I think that's probably largely the biggest change in society that our parents are referring to, and it gives them the biggest challenge. So again, arguably much more could be done to equip parents with the skills and knowledge that they need to support their children. There was a fabulous initiative many years ago, and it was running a program within school settings. And what the service provider did was they delivered this session to children during the day within their post-primary setting. They ran the exact same session in the evening then for parents. So when children were talking about the information that they'd been shared about online platforms and social media, the parents then actually knew and understood what they were talking about. So sometimes it is about not forgetting our parents as a target audience, and we're delivering all these sessions within schools to ensure children and young people are aware of the dangers and staying safe online. But what has been done to replicate that with parents? So I think the whole online world is a huge shift from what our parents perhaps have experienced themselves growing up, and they see that as a big change in society, which is having a big impact on them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a further layer to that as well, because quite a lot of grandparents are watching their grandchildren, and some are very clued into the advances in digital technology, some better than me even. And equally, I have a 4-year-old nephew who could handle an iPad or any digital device much better than I could as well. And it really does show you how things have massively changed. You pointed to a very important point, and it really ties to my previous question about language and social skills. People even up and just below my age, I think, struggle to have a conversation with other people because of that barrier and the dependency on digital equipment to communicate. So someone could communicate quite effectively by text message, social media, etc., etc. But when it comes to an actual conversation, which is vital for the world of work, and developing skills for the future, I think that's where a lot of barriers have emerged. And you only have to go into a restaurant to see a young couple together, and they're both on phones instead of actually chatting to each other. So there are considerable issues in this regard, but particularly with young people, and there becomes a dependency on children on the device. And unfortunately, the parent ends up in a situation where in order to get the child settled or the young person settled, they have to give them some form of a device. Now, that's not the right answer, but unfortunately, it is happening on a much larger scale. I think that digital devices, whilst they have changed our world largely for the better, they do create considerable barriers for younger people, particularly in communication and important development as well. And more so, you're right, the safety elements of it, because all the time, unfortunately, in society, there are those who are trying to exploit vulnerable people, and certainly children are absolutely vulnerable via online platforms. And we really do need to draw greater attention to it. And even so, not just young people and children, but also adults as well. And really, there's a very clear lack of accountability by the owners of these platforms to deal with these issues very quickly. For instance, bullying. I've heard more and more about children at very young ages, from 12, even younger, that are being bullied online, and it's had a detrimental impact on them. And in fact, not that far away from where I am, a young child a number of years ago, unfortunately, took their life as a result of the severe challenge that existed there. So this is a massive area and something certainly I'm very interested in.
Thanks for that, Daniel. Can I bring in Robbie Butler, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Hello, Mrs. Brooks. Hello, Conal. How are you? Thanks for that. Probably, first of all, just say how important I think these reports are, and this engagement, because this Education Committee, obviously, its priority is monitoring and scrutinising the education of our children, not just for academic purposes, but in terms of well-being, physical fitness, and all of those things, and how our schools perform, and all of those stakeholders. However, we do know that our children probably spend more time at home with their parents and their carers, and this is a partnership approach. So if we are to focus and try and just dump everything into our schools, then we're doing a disservice. This is part of the joined up conversation. So I totally get why you're here, and I do appreciate the work that you do. And Charlene, thank you for also picking out the work that you particularly do in regard to working with men and single men in terms of the difficult relationships sometimes that exist in single parent families and those things. One of the things, and Daniel was talking about it there, and we can see it because of Conal Baxter's limited internet capacity, because he's breaking up and flaking. So you do talk about, the many parents reported problems with technology, okay? So did that go into any depth in terms of what that is? Is it digital poverty? Is it the availability and speed of broadband? Is that the type of thing that we're talking about? Or is it digital literacy?
So I wasn't actually sure whether that was me or was it Conal, but yes, I can see he's broken up.
It's Conal's. And when the slides were up, Conal, just so you know, some of the slides were broken up a little bit too. But it's fine.
Sorry, but Robbie, I'm out in Armagh, so maybe it's the broadband out here.
Yes. Yeah.
Talking about digital literacy, maybe that's something we need to invest in as a party, ensuring our staff have got that broadband coverage. We didn't go into detail again. As I say, it was a fairly broad scoping survey, Robbie, as you know. But the main concerns that parents raised was about digital use that I've just described to Daniel, with the amount of time that their children are spending online, access to social media and things like that. But it without doubt came up in, again, the open questions, which Conal did refer to in his opening survey response, which was parents did make reference to the lack of devices. And I do think, obviously, we know that at the start of the pandemic, that was maybe heightened. So it would probably be, well placed to conduct a survey again if we really wanted to scope that in more detail, because I do know the situation is quite fluid, and obviously lots of parents have more access to devices now than they had. You also raised the question about broadband coverage, and again, that's not something we specifically asked. It did come up with a number of parents. But if we wanted to find more detail on that, I would suggest that's something we probably would need to do almost as a standalone piece.
No problem. And because there was another part of the survey which also was very interesting. It talks about the parents recognising that they wanted more support, and it was I think the survey shows it went up from 83% to 87% in terms of requests, and the majority of those people want the support to be delivered online. Do you think is that as a result of COVID, or is that a societal thing, or is it, I imagine it's a societal thing. I think it's people trying to find time, but it'd be interesting to find out what the background of that is.
Thank you for that question, Robbie. I think that's a good question, and it's something that we're grappling with even as a charity with regards to the services and supports that we then deliver to parents. There's a couple of reflections I would make on that point. The first is, I do think as a consequence of COVID, we can recognise that there are more services readily available online. So, for example, and we've just touched on our dad's project and some of the work we do with men. I have to be honest, our retention rates have never been so high. Our attendance rates at our dad's talk sessions on a weekly basis have never been as high. So the engagement is significant on that online platform. So I do think that's because of the ease of access. Some dads are working during the day and they're jumping into their car and they're on their phone and they're able to join in the peer support session. Whereas previously they might have had to drive to a venue, get parked, get in, it all became a lot more cumbersome. So there's lots of our learning for us, and lots of our services we will offer that hybrid with some face-to-face and some online, even when we've reached, if we're ever going to reach the end of the road with regards to the pandemic. But we know there are some services that are just not well suited to online. So our example is our home visiting service, and other providers in the sector I know are the same, where there really is value in being able to sit with a parent, have a cup of coffee, and really get to know them and build that relationship. And that is very difficult to do online. So my point around the whole piece around online is, I think, yes, there will be a space, and that'll be a societal shift where many more services are going to need to look at how they adapt, deliver online. But my second point is that sometimes it's a method of engagement online. So parents will indicate that they want to access support online. Sometimes the issues are that complex or that entrenched, or that there's a myriad of different things that need unpicked. The reality is that online services and support is not inevitably going to help support that parent in the way that they maybe need support. So although online activities are good to an extent, I would suggest there will always be a place for some kind of face-to-face supports. And the online provision is more the entry point to engage parents, but it's not necessarily going to be the end point.
Okay, thank you, Charlene, and thanks, Connell. Thank you very much. I'll catch up with you soon. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Robbie. Can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Conal and Charlene, for your presentation this morning. I'd just like to echo what Robbie said there. It's really, really important that we get to hear from yourselves and get this type of survey and get to hear from parents. Myself and the Chair sit on the Parental Participation in Education All-Party Group, and that really is a really good way of kind of showing the importance of having parents' voice in regards to education and just having their voice heard. So I fully agree with you there. I suppose from those groups and from your own survey, mental health and the mental health of parents and the mental health of our children is really paramount at the minute. And I think it's important that parents' mental health in particular aren't overlooked, because quite rightly there is a lot of focus on the mental health and well-being of children. And as of course that's really, really important, but we shouldn't be overlooking parents as well. So I think that's a really important factor. Daniel has actually asked most of the questions I wanted to ask about technology and that, but one other point I want to touch upon, I don't think it's been discussed much this afternoon. I know, Conal, you did mention it in your opening remarks, but that's about parents with children with special educational needs. So I know there were some responses from those parents within the survey, but can you tell me, did they identify any particular challenges that other parents didn't can identify, and what additional supports they might need, from us?
So I'll just, then I'll pass over to Conal. So yes, we definitely did see an increase, Nicola, this year. I did actually anticipate you were going to ask that question. So thank you for that. But there has been an increase in the number of parents who have responded with children with additional needs or with a disability. So that is something we see as growing within a generic parenting survey, that those parents with children with additional needs are seeking further support and are seeking opportunities to have their voice heard. So there has been an increase for us, and Conal, maybe you're going to jump in and give a few examples of what maybe those parents were talking about specifically.
That's actually something I was going to say. The nature of the support wasn't actually given within the responses, which is something that was quite surprising. But there was I think one of the quotes that I said before was around, the cliff edge after the GCSE age was a couple of parents did mention that, but it is in general, it seems to be the themes are with those parents in general seems to be, those children being left behind within their education, or one parent said, their child was clinically extremely vulnerable and they hadn't been in school and they weren't receiving extra support that way. So those are sort of the general parts around being left behind seem to be the themes, but the actual specific support wasn't elaborated on.
Okay, thanks for that, Conal and Charlene. I suppose maybe we could go back and speak to them to find out kind of what additional supports they would need and would find helpful, because we all know it was a very testing time for parents, suppose, especially those of children who attend special schools, and that was one of the reasons why in the second lockdown the special schools remained open, because it's very stressful for parents and dealing with behavioural issues and all that there. So I think that's a worthwhile kind of topic to be maybe delving into further. But listen, thanks very much for your presentations here this morning, and for all that information and for the work that you're doing. I do think it's really, really important, and I look forward to engaging with you again in the future.
Thanks, Nicola, and that rounds us up well. I think that's all our members' questions for you, Charlene and Conal, and just to echo Nicola's thanks for all the work that you're doing and for presenting on those findings and proposals for us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you all in the committee for giving us this opportunity. Really, really helpful. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, can I ask broadcasting to bring members back into the spotlight and ask Clark if there are any actions from the briefing?
Chair, I would suggest that we ensure that the Minister is aware of these findings, because once again, those are very hard-hitting statistics about parental engagement in education and parental mental health issues related to the pandemic, and to see what work is ongoing in the department, to get an update on work that was trailed, I think, earlier in the year about parental participation. Do you have anything additional? I know you're on that APG.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair summary, Clark, and perhaps we could ask the Minister for Education in what way, if any, the Department of Education will be contributing to that cross-departmental family and parenting support strategy.
Chair, I wonder.
Yes, Robin.
Would it be helpful to the group if we also sent a copy of the report to the Chair of Chair of Health and Chair of Communities, or indeed both the ministers? The Minister of Health has it, but also maybe the Minister for Communities, since some of the issues raised obviously percolate down into community level.
Content to agree that suggestion, Robin. Yeah, members agreed.
Thank you, Robin.
Okay. Okay, members. Members are content to agree those actions. Then we'll move to agenda item 9, Clark, the Department of Education draft budget 2022 to 2025. Can I refer members to a briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 188, a response from the Minister of Finance on the education budget at page 193, correspondence from the Committee for Finance, page 197, Hansard of the DE briefing on the January monitoring round in the budget on the 19th of January at page 199, briefing paper from DE on January monitoring at page 212, and responses to the committee's call for views on the draft budget from the Controlled Schools Support Council, Council for Catholic Maintained Schools, NASUWT, and the Education Authority at page 227 to 242, and correspondence from the Committee for Finance on Estimates Memoranda 2021 to 2022 at page 244. Could I seek members' agreement to write to the Committee for Finance summarising the evidence received by the Education Committee on the draft budget and the views of stakeholders on the draft budget? Agreed? Okay, members, thank you. Content with that, Clark? Yeah.
Yes, Chair. There's a lot of material there that members will want to draw on for the budget debate next week. So next week there'll be a debate on the supplementary estimates on Monday, and then on Tuesday the second stage debate of the budget bill, and there'll be an opportunity for members to discuss underfunding in education, particular programmes that they urge the department to fund, how the department managed to prioritise those issues, COVID matters, that whole range of issues. There'll be an opportunity for members to refer to these documents and discuss that in the chamber next week.
Okay then, members, if we're content to agree that response, then agenda item 10 is any other business? No. Okay, then the date and time of our next formal meeting is Wednesday the 23rd via Starleaf, starting at 9 a.m. Clark. Yep.
Yes, Chair, I think you're right about that.
Okay, thanks for that, Clark. I put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thanks, members. Thank you,
Thanks.
Clark.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone. Bye.